So we already know how to name our ionic substances, don't we? What do we do when we name an ionic substance? We put an "ide" on the end. So for sodium oxide, for example, the sodium part, the beginning part of the name, no change. And then we add "ide" on for our anion. Yep, so this is ionic bonding, ionic naming. We name our covalent compounds differently. And we have to do this because they can bond together in lots more ways than our ions can. So our sodium ion forms a single positive charge, that's all it can do. And so it's fairly straightforward. But when we're naming our covalent compounds, we have to make a few more adjustments. Okay, so how do we go about naming? We need to look at this page on our formula sheet. So I'm going to turn to page 3 of your formula sheets. We need to use the prefixes. Okay? And we have a couple of rules as to how we go about applying the prefixes. If there's only one of the first thing named, so let's start with this one. What's this thing's name? It's a carbon and an oxygen. Carbon monoxide. Because there's only one carbon, we don't normally say monocarbon. Okay, we just say the carbon. But then for the second and subsequent elements present in the compound, we have to say how many there are. And this is where we're using our prefixes. So the mono is telling me that there's now one oxygen. Okay? So we have to put the prefix in for the still ends in "ide." What about this one? And see, this is why we need to have this different naming. Because what's this? Carbon dioxide. Now, ionic compounds cannot do this, but our nonmetals can. And so, if we didn't say the dioxide part here, we wouldn't know that this was the structure that we needed to draw on what we had. Okay, does that make sense? And we're still calling it carbon because there's only one, but we have to put the prefix in to say what's present for our other molecule. We have some common names. This is called water. Okay, you don't need to use any other name than water for that. It's a common name. We already know the common name for this one as well, don't we? Ammonia. Yeah, so we just use those names. We don't try and name them systematically because they are so commonly used. And if we look look at something like this, how do you think we're going to name that one? How can we use our rules to name that one? Okay, I've got 2 fingers up. Can you, who wants to be brave? I only have 2 volunteers for bravery, 3 volunteers for bravery. Okay, well, I'll put you out of your miseries. How about Amy? What do you think?
Would be like dye, phosphorus, and then penta.
Just pent, yeah. Diphosphorus. Thames oxide. Yes, that's right. So because there's no longer just one, we have to say how many there are. What about what would that be? Yep.
Oh, dye. Would it be like nitride or no?
No, good thinking. It's just the name again. So we're just putting in the name for that first one, but we have to say how many. So it's dinitrogen, tetroxide, or tetroxide. Depending on how you derive, yeah. Okay, so can you see that this is a little bit different to how we were naming our ionic compounds? So when you're asked to name, or when you're looking at reactions, you're going to need to look and see, is the first thing named a metal or a non-metal? Because if it's a metal, you'll need to name it for ionic bonding, and if it's a non-metal, you'll have to name it for covalent bonding. Whether it's a substance that, it could be something that you haven't seen before. So you're going to need to be looking at your periodic tables to make sure you know where the separation between metals and non-metals is, so that you can name correctly.
What happens if it's along that line, the metalloids line?
As long as it's on the metal side of the line, it's a metal, and for us, anything on the other side is a non-metal. Yep. And so and those metalloids basically behave as non-metals, except in special circumstances. So, is that okay? That I want you to have a go at the naming in question set 3.6. But not just sort of naming it without thinking firstly. I want to confirm that, yeah, I understand that these are all non-metals. I want you to be looking at them and familiarising yourself with the fact that these are non-metals, so that when you come to name them in more unfamiliar circumstances, you're more likely to name them correctly. Okay?